is Gamer 1745, and it looks like things are good. Streaming platforms here, at least. Are we live over on the YouTubes? Yes, it looks like. Yes, it looks like we're live there. Yes. Hello, everyone. This is, like I say, Gamer 1745, and hello, Arno, you are first, and moon landings. Let's see, I could spend all day talking about things, or we could play a little bit of Hearts of Iron. I think we're going to play some Hearts of Iron before we get to talking about everything. We didn't really talk about things last time. So we will do that this time. They're heading east. Yes, good. He has a slot for another division, so we will do that. Bit of thickness to the line there. Yeah. What are we doing on resources? Rubber seems to be our need. But I think we will try to live without it. In the sense of not trade for it. Better refinery. We have not building one of those. Well, in to join a faction. Italy, no, we're not joining the Italian faction. Yes, we will go with the historical. Homeland Defense, Fighter Bombers, Knights of the Air, Generation, Efficiency, Aviation, it's good for the US maybe. Medium range escorts, it's maybe good for the US to escort in. And how are you doing, Arno? Do that. Oh, I got the unlock and I probably didn't do that. Back here now, yes. Back. We've got all of these. I'm doing well. I Went shooting yesterday, as I think you know from the post over on Discord. So that's always nice when I get a chance to go shooting. Let's let the forces get up to the front line here. What guns did I shoot? I shot a .22 caliber Colt single action army. I am trying to get good with that. And it takes shooting and shooting and shooting to do that kind of thing. And I might go again today. But if I don't go again today, probably tomorrow after stream. Okay, now we are basically in place in a very unscientific, unorganized way, meaning we just sort of move the divisions here. Not like planned for anything particular. We have a lot of, I am worried about the Soviet front. We have a lot of the weaker Romanian, Hungarian type divisions out here. A few smattering of German divisions up in the north of the sector. I like shooting 22s for two reasons. One, very much to admit, they're much cheaper. They're only about 10% of the cost per shot as shooting a more normal full caliber type round. That's part of it. And so shooting a lot, you know, you can basically it varies. Somewhere between 9mm is pretty cheap actually. Yeah, it's probably only 25% the cost instead of 10%. But you can shoot a lot more per per day for the same amount of money. And two, muscle fatigue. If you go shoot 60, 80, 100 rounds in a day, there's a lot of muscle fatigue with that. At one point in my life, for a good chunk of a year, well more than 6 months, it wasn't quite a full year, but a good chunk of the year, I was shooting 5 days a week. 4 of the 5 days I was shooting at least 50 rounds of 9mm, and 1 of the 5 days I was shooting 200 rounds of 9mm. So that's quite a bit of shooting per day. I don't know if I'm going to get back to that level of shooting, but I do want to get better at doing more. And so I am not terribly familiar with shooting a single action. I mean, the gun, actually, the Colt that I was shooting was my grandfather's gun. Very nice Colt pistol, an actual Colt, not a replica thing. That he bought probably in the 60s or something. It's not an ancient Colt. It's, now 60s, yeah, that's 60 years old or something, so it's not brand new either. And I do have some 38 special single action armies. Now those are other replicas, not Colts. Colts will run you, well, somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 for basic models. And not that I can't afford that, that's just a lot of money per gun. And they make, the Italians nowadays make very nice copies. So that's what I have there. Isn't there any focus where you can build the east wall? Okay, that's an interesting question. Now I am somewhat. What national focus are we doing now? Armaments rationalization. Okay. That's a good one. I am sort of used to playing Black Ice around Maginot Line. I don't think I want to wait the time this takes. Go around, gains focus, war goal against. Filter 6. So, we won't wait on that. Westerborn. I don't know that we're going to take that. Eastern Plains. Now the bonds, I figured that's maybe now that we have Poland, we have Gdynia. Zig. That, which will add infrastructure. The east. This is fortify the fatherland. I guess not. Now there were fortifications in the east. Not anything to the scale of those in the west, but definitely. Why isn't it letting me do economy of conquest? Have less. Near the west. Well, like I say, this is the west wall focus, so I don't. This is Kammersdorf, whatever. Is the Panzer School, I know. Salvage captured equipment. You get the Alfred Becker. I thought it was Arno Becker. Was the guy who really started and did a lot of the early conversions of You're mad now? Oh, we've got to justify war goal. Oh, well, maybe we should. How much longer is this going to take? Oh, 70 days. Well, I guess it's going to take us a while to get around. Well, you know, if I planned better, I could definitely have already justified the war goal of taking Belgium out. Okay, the next one will be around these up and running. Well, what do we need? Let's look at our logistics. We're using up some of this stuff. Infantry equipment, we're using quite a bit, though we have 180,000 of it. We could use more tactical bombers. Now that's going to use... Yukas, or is it... No, yeah, it's the eating bombers. We'll use or need more rubber. We have a deficit of 5. How are we doing on building our plant? And let's build another one. I don't know that Germany could have built in a practical sense, not if it went extreme, but in a practical sense, if it could have built enough synthetic factories, you know, oil, you know, synthetic oil, I guess refineries would be technically the better term. But they definitely could have built more than they did. Would they have been able to build enough? They definitely had enough coal to liquefy. Coal was never the problem. Not in any real sense. I don't, you know, I say that and I'm thinking, you know, the dam busters that flooded a bunch of mines. I mean, maybe bomb damage, destruction, but I was going to say there was issues with you know, getting it to where it needs to go because of bombing, because of and they've talked about some of the stuff that you know, transportation needs were such that there were shortages. But I think, and this is very much looking at, oh, hey, if they were just capitalists instead of central planners, they would have solved a lot of these problems. Let's look here. Flying artillery, that's close air support. And wouldn't it? I don't know whether this is a language issue. You know, these people don't speak English as a first language. I'm not saying I couldn't communicate with them, but people like that don't oh, let's see. War in South America, stemming from disputes between regions of Napo and Santiago, border Peru. Okay, there was a war, whatever, brief thing like that, way down here. Historically. But back to what I'm talking about. whether because these games are developed out of Sweden, and I've talked with some of the people, and they speak English very well, most of them. But that doesn't mean that they have a natural understanding of English. And or it could be just a lack of familiarity with terms. Hello, Jamnuska. How you doing? And a viewbot over on Twitch, if Arno hasn't already squashed it yet. But ground naval coordination, and we're talking about strike aircraft here, okay, of some sort. Naval targeting, ground attack factor. Huh? What are they talking about here? Ground naval coordination. I guess ground attack factor is? Should that be ground and because it's small, and naval coordination for air? Because if it's meant for precision naval bombing, okay. See, this just to me is, because ground naval. How do you get ground naval coordination when we're talking about aircraft? How does ground and naval coordinate? I don't know. Sea to shore power, that's, carrier-based strikes. I know an original design concept here was choices. Okay, I understand that. I don't fully agree with that. Because some of the nations, particularly the U.S., but Germany also to some degree falls within some of these, can sort of kind of do it all. Germany, sea to shore power, no, Germany has no carriers. Italy has no carriers. Italy does do, float planes pretty heavily, but it doesn't. Britain does have carriers, but they're really not significantly, and I'm going to use that term significantly, used for operations over land. And I'm going beyond just simply supporting a naval invasion. Okay? Now that's maybe all that these people are thinking about here. But I'm also going with the idea that you look at like battles in Okinawa out here. I know, and they've overly made these islands big, and I guess to sort of show that this whole operation here was well more than just a D-Day and getting ashore, and then establishing shore bases. Now, D-Day, of course, had the channel and readily be able to fly beyond it readily, not where, longer range aircraft can take off from Tunis and get over Sicily and bomb a target and go home. But that's a long time, okay? Where a carrier sitting off here can much more quickly respond, much more quickly get reloaded, at least flight times. You may have a lot of handling of the aircraft, getting it, landing it on the flight deck, getting it down to the lower, because you got to sort of clear the flight deck best to instead of having it all cluttered up when you're bringing in more aircraft, trying to getting them down to the hangar to bomb them and then moving them back from the hangar up to the flight deck to take them back off, kind of thing. Where here, obviously, you just land on the runway and move off to the side of the runway wherever the station is to reload. So, but if you're but as soon as you can, you want to build bases on land to be down here and fly up to here and back and forth. So yeah, the British definitely can use carriers in landing operations. Now, I don't know how much they did. I'm not saying they didn't, but I do know the Americans were involved in a lot of the landings here, including the landings here, where here, yeah, you definitely had Gibraltar, but they were using carrier-based air support. But mostly at scale only for the initial landings, where the much longer campaign into clearing out Okinawa and some of the Guam, this is Iwo Jima, which you might sort of think, I mean, this is much bigger than what Iwo Jima actually was. You might sort of think that is just a landing assault, maybe, but some of these were a lot more going on taking the fortifications. So and this was pointed out long ago, how some of these doctrines, land doctrines, were one thing in Europe and a very different thing in the Pacific, and not just partially because of the Marines, but the Marines were primarily, not exclusively, but primarily used for Nimitz's campaign across the Pacific, where the Army was primarily, I mean, it's carried on Navy ships, but the Army was primarily responsible for MacArthur's island hopping, and it was island hopping to a degree, but campaign up through the Solomons and then into the Philippines. And that's another place where there was a lot of carrier-based operations deep inland, not just for the initial landings. So this sort of structure, I presume, with modding, you could make an America only available button that would do 3 or 4 of these things. Maybe not all 6. Now, sometimes some of these things are mutually exclusive, meaning concentrated tactics or mass wave tactics. Hello, Soul the Civ guy. How you doing? Okay, we're gonna go with, let's see, I sort of like close air support, air defense. What is the difference between, I mean, I see air defense plus 15%, ground attack plus 10%, pinpoint strike versus flying artillery. I mean, I get the effects. I think I'm going to go for pinpoint strikes. But isn't that flying artillery? Because we're talking here about strike aircraft and not medium aircraft. I'm going to go with that and then unlock. And then we're going to look here. Now here, this is your medium aircraft. This is your your level bombers, which could do close air support and did. The Germans did. The Americans did. Depends on how you want to look at it. The British, not so much. Okay, heavy fighter. Let's see, it's heavy fighter. Operational support, that would be maybe more for The Germans, theater interdictions, that sort of what the Americans were doing. Long-range escort, that's also what the Americans were eventually doing. Tactical battlefield support, ground attack. I sort of like that. I think we're going to do that. That would also sort of be the Germans. Yeah, Arno hurt his knee a few years ago, or knees a few years ago, and has been recovering slowly and painfully and whatnot. I think I'm going to leave this extra, maybe I'm mistaken to do so, extra air experience, because we're just not going down, I don't think, the heavy aircraft path. So we're going down to this, this, this. Yeah, I'm sure age very well may have an element to that. Okay, Wilhelm list, so we can get to here while we're waiting for national focuses to do here. So we get that and that done. Well, that's good to hear that it is steady here, that you are getting more and more recovery. Okay, I think right now these will be more useful in the east than in the west. And recovery is slower as you get older, Arno. Just good news for you, you know. Something to look forward to. All this. Okay, armaments rationalization. That was here. So factory and dockyard efficiency and production base efficiency is caps are approved. We're gonna come over here, and I'm not quite sure what it we're gonna go around here. Don't know whether we're justifying claims or which one would have the justifying claims you're doing around Maginot would get us quickest, but we'll do that. Only one thing worse than getting old, not getting old. So, you know. These Polish gold reserves. Okay, we have 95. Campaign instructions against France. What will this do? How's an ongoing effects when selected? Grants armor attack. Active for 365 days for a year. Okay, we're going to be going within the year. Collect scrap metal. Activation level 4. Get oil. More oil. Um, Heroism, bolster spirits. We don't have enough. Army, but just sort of barely to some degree there. But breakthrough and armored division attack. Okay, I think we'll do this now. Get away there and unleash these armored divisions that we have. Okay, Hungarian bomber competition. Okay, we'll see if that helps. Advanced oil processing. Okay, that's useful. Well into 41, so we could do that. But let's look back here. Okay, we're either researching or can't research yet. There. Not the computers. We don't need the fire control because we're not really doing naval. Let's do it. But I like this. Soft attack from artillery goes up. That's something that will be, fairly universally used. The divisions have artillery. These guys are having supply problems here. Well, I think we'll let them have supply problems. Okay, well, yeah, let's... that made it better. Get the organization up. 100% better, but it's a lot better. But we're striking. Okay, we sunk a British submarine. And not 7 others that were there. And we sunk another one, and not 6 others that were there. So our air operations are doing some good. So, chat everywhere. What would have happened had Germany not invaded Denmark and Norway? And I want to put it that way. And you can give me a wall of text if you want, or just a brief sentence. But I would really like to hear what... Okay, how are we doing for our... Okay, we are now positive with rubber by doing those 2 factories, or refineries, I should say. What new aircraft? Close air support. You're doing the D there. Okay. D, we have the G. I think we're going to leave the D. Because, and the reason I'm mainly, and I don't know the exact, well, we could look here. Okay. Not bombers, G and D here. We're producing the D. Okay, range 550, range 650, so range would actually go down. Air defense 9, air defense 12. This is looking okay. Agility 12, agility 54. What are we doing here? I like the D better, so we're going to leave the D in production. They both would have stayed neutral. Arno's thoughts. Not that I will comment here in a moment, but okay, we are full when it comes to fuel. We'll put a fuel silo here. Store up more fuel once we really start using it and driving into the enemy. Give other people a chance if they want to, Jamnuska or whoever. Now we know, obviously, hello, Thomas. Wouldn't the UK have just occupied at least Norway? Yes, that's was German pressure towards Benelux, right? That was being planned. My understanding is that, and well, yes and no. My understanding, some of the ability for the rapid response for both the French and the British, because there was some French units up in the Norway campaign. Not a lot, I don't believe, but some. Was that they were planning on occupying. Now, what's the difference between occupying and invasion? I don't think the French or the British were going to take over Norway or Denmark in the sense of like annexing territory. Now, Germany didn't do that either. I have to be very clear on that. Okay, Germany did not annex Norway or Denmark. And see, this is one thing that and particularly here, and I don't know in some of the mods, and I don't know exactly how okay, resistance here, 0 resistance. And okay, so this is operating, because this is, and I'm thinking, I think mostly like a black ice and some of the others. I would put I'm going to use the old English terms, Bohemia and Moravia. I know this is the German Bohemian, and Marin, but as opposed to modern day Czechia. But I'm looking at these two provinces because the Sudetenland was very ethnically German. Okay. I put these as largely, yeah, I know that there were some strikes, but there were also strikes inside of Germany too. Some leading up to World War II, some little bit during World War II. Um, but there were some strikes, but they, well, I'll say in Prague or wherever, because it was held there. Um, they had a sports day or weekend or whatever. It may have been like 2 days or something. A big sports day there, which was very National Socialist focused. I think one of the main prizes they gave out was a rather large, 2 foot by 3 foot or bigger portrait of Hitler. You know, um, there may have also been a bit of cash, but it wasn't. I don't think so much cash. But it was a sports day for youth. I don't want to say children, but also not adults. That sort of teenage years. Young, very young adults, but still maybe like in the adult age, but and give you, and I keep going more and more background instead of planning these out. When Germany takes over, more or less, you could self-identify as who you were. No, not if the Germans could identify you as being particularly Jewish. That was something that they were going to identify you as Jewish. But more or less everybody else could self-identify. Were you Czech or were you German? Before the war starts, the sort of elite language in Prague was German. Now, as the war is ramping up, the elite stop speaking German in public. So understand, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you're part of the Austrian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Higher education is going to be in German, as far as I know. Now, traditionally in the Austrian Empire, the elite spoke French to each other and Germans to their servants. That was sort of the thing. I don't know when, if that shifts over, and maybe the Austrian elites give up speaking French to each other because they're now German. But they saw German as a crude language and French as the sophisticated language. And this, I'm talking about the 18th century and Napoleonic eras. If you were the elite, you spoke French. By the time World War I is rolling around and post World War I, people like Einstein was thinking and doing his scientific work in German, at least until he comes to America. And I don't know if he ever switches over. I'm not an Einstein expert by any means. And so now, as German pressure is ramping up over the Sudetenland, particularly in Prague, you don't want the waiter or the cook to spit in your food. So you don't want to be thought of as being German in Prague, because Germans are a minority. There are truly people that would classify themselves ethnically left over from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they would see themselves as German. but they didn't. But they also sort of, kind of, those that saw themselves as Germans were maybe yay for Germany, but they didn't like want to get their food spit in as well. But the non-Germans, Czechs, that saw themselves as Czech, but spoke German almost as their primary language and Czech as their secondary language, also didn't want to get their food spit in, or whatever, so cafes and whatever, they would speak to each other in Czech. But I think they would be writing their scientific papers, maybe, or whatever the equivalent, in German. I don't know how that works from what industry and factory and whatnot to others. But it had been, Skoda, one of the main armaments factory in Czechoslovakia, of course, was, I'm going to use the term, Austro-Hungarian primary armaments factory, used in World War One. So you're going to have huge amounts of people that speak German within that. Now, how many of them, once it becomes Czechoslovakia, do they pick up and move to Austria or to Germany or to some place else? How many of them just stay because it's their home, their grandparents' home, their whatever? They've been there for, generations. I don't know whether the locals assimilated into the German viewpoint or migrated from other places, or just how far back. Do they go back to the Dark Ages with German sort of tribes living in that part of the world too? I don't know. I'll finish the story briefly here, but and get back to some of the other stuff. So because of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Czechs are used to having German overlords. They're, like I say, this sports day, and they have like a parade, a march of people that, to me, it looks like tens of thousands. Now, there may be hundreds of thousands or maybe even million or something. I don't know the population of Prague. And I'm not saying the majority of the population of Prague. I'm saying a very large segment of the population of Prague, to one degree or another, voluntarily participates in this sports day. And I know this because, books and whatnot were printed with photographs at the time, and I made for my mod that I don't know that works anymore for the current versions of Black Ice for Hearts of Iron 3. But I had an event that covered this thing for Germany in my Third Reich events month, like I say. So there very well may be people under a certain amount of pressure. But I think if you had a serious objection, you weren't like forced to go there. It might be like, oh, hey, I want to be seen to get promoted at my job at work, so I'm going to have my kid. So it's basically for the youth, But there's huge amounts of adults watching, whether grandmothers or parents or whatever. Einstein did publish stuff in English, but all of that stuff he is known for by the public was in German. Yeah, hello, Repeat. How you doing? Yeah, but I'm also thinking when he's thinking scientifically, and making notes to himself and whatnot, was that in German or in English? One of my friends, and I'll out him here, Eric, he's Norwegian, but he was, at least, in his very young years, raised overseas in places like China and Vietnam. So he went to a lot of expatriate schools that were English speaking. And he says, like, one of his best friends as a kid was from Oregon, and most of the teachers were, American English speakers. So he speaks with an American accent. Where his other good friend, Toyjet, and both these guys show up, and I'm outing them because they do show up and play for War Thunder Day. And hi, Eric or Toyjet, if you're here. And those are their screen names. um, speaks with a Norwegian accent, where Eric speaks with an American accent when he speaks English. Eric speaks very good natural English. Oftentimes, when Eric is translating something for me, just like a news article or whatever, from Norwegian to English, and if Toyjet is there, he will often, not always, not every time he's translating something, but often ask Toyjet what a Norwegian word that he's reading is in English. Because Toyjet is a native Norwegian speaker who's through school learned to speak English, where Eric is a native Norwegian speaker and a native English speaker. He speaks those, and I'm saying this, and I think I'm 100% right. Prague was 950 to 100. Thank you, Dutov. Devlich. I think that's how you break that up. I don't know if that's supposed to be one word or two. But, and so yeah, tens of thousands were there. It doesn't mean it's a majority of people in Prague and or regionally that, came in via the train for the day. Eric is both a native Norwegian speaker and a native English speaker. And his mind, and I can tell from this and other things, his mind switches between the two languages. Toyjet, not that he couldn't come up with a translation of the word, but Toyjet is better at translating Norwegian to English because that's his skill, because he's a native Norwegian speaker and a good, but, school-learned English speaker. And so he, I think Toyjet often mostly thinks in Norwegian, maybe thinks somewhat in English when he's hanging out playing War Thunder with us or something. But I don't know whether he thinks in one and translates the other speak. But I'm sure that Eric either thinks in English or thinks in Norwegian. And it's sort of two different skill sets, so it isn't and so he's good enough to translate things, but sometimes he's a little stuck on the word, and if in the voice chat, if Toyjet's there, instead of him trying to work it out or do, Google Translate something, it's easier for him just there. Where if he was reading it in English, he would just get it because his mind is naturally flowing in it. So for somebody, and this is sort of understanding of languages. So I don't know how when Einstein, I'm pretty sure that Einstein was not school taught, as growing up, English speaking. I could be wrong about that, but and of course he's a brilliant person that can learn a language. But when he's doing his early relativity things, and he's looking at the clock tower, for this the story goes, and traveling away from it or whatever, and all that stuff, and I'm not good to be able to repeat all of that, and he's coming up with these thoughts. I'm sure he's doing that in German. It's happening inside of, I think, Vienna or wherever. But he is coming from a polyglot, multi-language, that's what it basically means, capital and empire, because it was still Austro-Hungary at the time, that had Slovaks and Czechs and Magyars, and those are the Hungarians, and Slovenes and Croats, and lots of elite speaking French and whatever. It's a Vienna is very much a multi-ethnic city. That's why Hitler hates it. He grows up out near Lens, not necessarily in there, but there, in a very German ethnic community, and going to Vienna. I think he likes the big city, but he hates the multicultural aspect of it. So, yeah, so I'm trying to explain what's going on with Czechoslovakia. So the German occupation of Czechoslovakia is not so immediately foreign to the people there. Basically, anybody who wanted to, when the Germans were coming in, you would literally go up to a desk somewhere, whether it's somewhere out in the countryside, because that's where they showed up, and they set a desk up outside and people lining up, or whether it's, in some office in the cities. everybody had to come in and they got to self-identify. If you could sort of say a decent sentence or two in German, not that you were approved some great fluency, but you could speak a bit in German and say, ich bin ein Deutsches or whatever, sort of taking that from ich bin ein Berliner, which sort of means I'm a donut, depending on your flavor of German that Kennedy says at his Berlin speech, though. I do like Reagan's tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev, and of course that ends eventually after his presidency, but just briefly after his presidency. It ends the Cold War. And I do think that speech very much helps with that. Not the only thing, obviously, but that. So, if you could say a few things in German, even brokenly, supposedly most of the National Socialist officials would put you down as German. And you would try to say, oh, well, my mother's German and I don't speak it so well, or whatever, and they weren't running around like, if you were joining the SS, now they were, 100 years back, approving German, purity, blah, blah, blah. But we're just talking about the standard population here. So if you wanted to be German, you were German. That was sort of the thing, more or less. Again, unless they were readily identifying you as something like Jewish or Gypsy or whatever. But beyond that, so the great bulk of the population of Bohemian Moravia we're talking about could self-identify as German. And then, if you were a young man, you were subject to the draft. Not if you were Czechoslovak. Or Czech by that point, because Slovakia was becoming a thing. So you had privileges by selecting yourself as German. You could vote in elections. Now that basically means you get to vote for which National Socialist candidate you want, sort of like, in communist regimes. And I've talked to people who are old enough, and particularly one of them was Czech. There were elections. And one of the things that back then he was trying to get coordination between the socialists and the communists in Czechoslovakia. There was no other acceptable political viewpoints at the time. Were you a hardline communist or just a socialist? So, it wasn't like, there were open, free, and fair elections. There still aren't in Germany. You can't be a National Socialist. Not that I want to see National Socialists win, but to anybody, and they're, recently, I believe, I don't know how recent, but recently the old Prime Minister of New Zealand spoke at the UN and said we have to limit speech to protect free speech. I don't know and this is in a prepared speech, and I presume she had it prepared. Does she not hear how dystopian? To save free speech, you must limit it? Just how effing dystopian that sounds? As opposed to, this is obviously gamers' modern political thing, as opposed to community notes now on Twitter. I don't know what happens. I know it's X, but we all know we're talking about Twitter. I know what happens towards us when community notes happen. Like if I've liked or commented on a video and then it gets community noted, I get a notification. So something, a lie will spread around the world before the truth can put its shoes on, or some statement like that. So, it's the idea that if somebody has put out something, that then the community notes team gets in and thinks that it's worthy of a community note, that somehow it's not necessarily false, but it's creating a false impression. Meaning it's not telling the whole story or something. It might be entirely false, but it might also mean that, yeah, you're telling the facts that you're giving are correct, but it's giving the wrong impression as to, um, like when they say a Maryland man um, does something awful to a youthful person, you know, kills them or something. Oh, community notes may go, oh, but this person is not an American citizen, like from a Latin American country or something. Yeah, he's a resident of, maybe whether legal or not, a resident of Maryland, but he isn't a native of Maryland or of the United States. He is from some other country. So they'll maybe community note that, and that no, the article or the post or whatever is not factually wrong in the sense that the person was most recently resident in Maryland, but is not your average Marylander. So, that kind of thing. So, yeah, that's how you deal with falsehoods. Now, of course, their main problem is not false information. Their main problem is truthful information that they don't want out. So, are you not single player? Hello, K64 444? Interesting name, but okay. K64 sounds better. So, yeah, modern dystopianism. But so you could self-identify. So I take it that Bohemia and Moravia, and like I say, there were protests which were sort of work stoppage, not like long term, but for a weekend or a few day strike or something like that. That work was shut down. Obviously, there was the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, which, yay, I'm not like blaming anybody. It's a good thing to do. Whether it was smart to do versus the backlash, I don't know. That's another tactical question. Was it worth it? But Bohemian, Moravian, of course, the Sudetenland are integrated into the Reich very closely. They do have Constantine van der Roth put in as the minister of that, who over time is largely supplanted by, though he doesn't lose the job, he's just too soft on the checks, is supplanted by Reinhard Heydrich, who I was just talking about. And that is clearly on the path to integration with Germany. Okay? Clearly. All of the old imperial lands of Poland, and I would say imperial, I mean German Empire, at the beginning of 1914, to be specific, all those lands were going to be, and basically were very rapidly, reintegrated back into the German Empire. Down here, this was called the general government. That's all it was ever called. The general government of what? They didn't want to say that. They did not use the word Poland, and I didn't mean Poland, not Poland. Poland is the German word for it. They did not want to use the word because they wanted to eventually erase the idea of Poland. It was just called the general government. Now, for these, they put a I believe he was SS, if I'm remembering correctly. But they put a very gentle occupier in charge of Denmark. I'm probably getting some of this wrong because, again, years ago and whatnot. But I believe he lets the Danish government know about 48 hours or something prior to the order to round up. And it wasn't until like 43 or something. I mean, they had to wear stars, but we're getting ready to round up the Jewish population. And they, so the overwhelming majority of the Jews in Denmark are gotten out by the Danes, the Danish government, in fact, gotten out of Denmark to Sweden. Few kill themselves. About 300 or so are captured by the Germans and are taken to a camp, and because we're now getting close to something, where you concentrate in. I'm being a little more careful with my language. To the best of my knowledge, K64 is fine. Good, thank you. And we will get back to playing the game after the history lesson, and I'm going to refer, and I'm trying to, I know people for propaganda reasons, partially some of them just because they have TDS, meaning if Obama did it, it would be absolutely fine and they would be cheering him. But just because Trump is doing it, it's bad. I mean, there are people out there that they are no longer rational when it comes to Trump. There is a huge difference between what had, we can talk both maybe ongoing wars, I don't know. But Putin's aggression versus Ukraine versus Trump's aggression, and I'm putting this very carefully, against Iran are two very different things. I fully support the concept of Trump's aggression against Iran because I too, and I have for years, even before Trump is elected the first time on this channel, have stated that when people tell you who they are, believe them. When Hitler told you who he was, believe him. Stalin, I don't know how Stalin can think it's a good idea to enable Hitler to take Poland and plan to take Lithuania, though that changes a bit, that he gets his territory, how he doesn't realize that there is eventually going to be a war. Now, you may go, oh, those resources. What resources is this really giving Russia? I mean, this part of Romania, because that's part of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, that this bit of, not the rest of Romania, because particularly Germany was very worried over Ploetsi and a few other little minor oil fields, but that was the main one, I believe. Is very worried over that and definitely does not want the rest of Romania. And if you don't know, leading up then about this time, there are 3 German divisions already sitting, like there are here now, sitting down in Romania as sort of guarantors against further Soviet aggression. But this part was sort of given over. This part of Poland plus, not all the way down into here, but sort of this part and this part were also given to Russia. But Germany did so well in its attack and sort of kept this land. That's why they traded in a treaty after, a few months or whatever, after the completion of the conquest of Poland, was traded this part of Poland for Lithuania to be part of Soviet Union, not independent. I don't know why this is states looking. I hate the state mechanic. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it with a passion. Maybe it should go. I don't know. I hate it. Provinces are fine. Would have Barbarossa gone better if they took Lithuania? That's a very good question, and very well. Starting from here to get, because Leningrad is a key fortification holding a key strategic point. I don't know that Finland would have done anything different, because all it would ever, and you're getting me sidetracked, but it's historical, so hopefully you're enjoying this. Finland very much calls this the continuation war, the Barbarossa or post Barbarossa war, the continuation war, and never puts troops. I mean, they might do bombing, airstrikes or something, but they never put troops outside of the old Finnish borders. They allow Germany to an attempt to attack out, which basically fails to cut the railway. But I'm not saying the initial attacks weren't good, but it's just so little infrastructure they don't get very far. They allow Germany, as well as Germany, to try to push to Murmansk, and again that doesn't get very far either. They allow the Germans to attack out of their territory, but they themselves will not leave this sort of pre-war Finnish border. Because Soviets do take this little peninsula here, and I think a couple of the islands or something that they then get back, and those never go back. But the old border, or this border goes back to the post Winter War border at the end of World War II. Had you taken Leningrad, now I think I've never been there, but a beautiful, artful city. Hitler probably would have gotten, and there was a lot of Western/German art that was there that Hitler would have loved to have had, and Goering and whoever, but they wouldn't have been displeased ultimately with the complete destruction of Leningrad or St. Petersburg or whatever. But so it's not so much for its industry that they want it, though they might have used it. It just would have, if the linked up on land with the Finns, it would have freed up a bunch of German divisions to do a bunch more things during the war. And had you had a starting point somewhere in here and pushed up versus a starting point back here, you very well might have gotten to Leningrad fast enough that the Leningrad defenses would not have been built up as well and taken Leningrad. And Russian forces, because it was this, whatever, I talked to them about it, and they former lead developer, not the original lead developer, but Podcat did like my idea of naming the rivers, but they never got around to adding that mechanic to be able to name the rivers. Because it's for doing these very things. Is this the Vistula? I don't know. I know some rivers, the Rhine and whatnot, but I don't know. It was sort of this river and then come over somewhere like in about here and go straight south was all going to be, and this part over here, give a little bit of a buffer for Warsaw or whatever, but this part over here was all going to be, and then the rest of this border is more or less, I mean, it wasn't 100% drawn, but it was, sort of understood. Had more Soviet forces been parked down here, you might think it might take more to fight your way through them, definitely more terrain, but while, part of Army Group is center is rushing towards Moscow, it might be a much easier attempt at surrounding, the Vistula. Well, thank you. Can you do war crimes in that game? Hello, Bombstall? Generally speaking, no. This is why food is not in the game, because it can lead to war crime stuff. And that was very much, again, just so, and I don't know you from being around, I was part of the original outside beta testers, meaning non-Paradox employees, because they have internal employees that are beta testers. And I'm sort of relearning, because with all the changes to Hoi 4, I'm sort of relearning all the changes. But I was part of the original, closed beta, but, invited in beta. So I have that, and I interacted a lot with the developers at the time. So very much, and this is they did not have supply, or they always talked a little bit about supply effects, but this is part of the reason. Part of it was some of the implementation problems of supply in Hearts, and people's complaining about it in Hearts of Iron 3, that they removed supply initially entirely, and then they sort of re-added back because of complaints supply effects, but without supplies. But they don't do food because of the ability, including the ability of modders, to try to put war crimes into the game. And they want to, whether you want to commit the war crimes as people players, or you just want to have that as part of the strategic stupidity of the Germans, putting so much effort into their war crimes that would have been, a certain element might, because we look at, compliance for resistance, etc., in the game, and how dealing with it, some of that might be, some of their activities might really just seem like, or be lumped into anti-resistance, including anti-resistance war crimes. But if you look at the overall picture, they, during the war, and part of it is to try to hide it in the chaos of the war, so that once peace is more or less coming, the crimes have already been swept under the rug, and just look back, and everyone would probably know about a certain level of the war crimes. They might not know how bad they were, the Germans, I'm particularly looking at, but they can just sort of all dismiss that as the bad times of the war, and now the good times are coming, as opposed to do the war crimes after the war. Obviously, they wouldn't be war crimes then; they'd just be crimes. They specifically have tried to design around direct war crimes, because food, I wouldn't call it a war crime. They were just trying to cut off supplies generally, which, yes, includes food, but we can even see like the the Russians burning, crops, which we're going to definitely starve out the Russians in that area, but trying to starve out Napoleon's armies as they're marching into Russia, burning the crops as they're advancing in and whatnot, and burning Moscow and whatnot. So food has been used, whether you want to consider it a modern day war crime or not, but food has, and denying food to the enemy has very much been a military tactic. We can talk about food someday, not today, and the Allies in Greece and a few other places and whatnot. But and they're definitely trying to starve out, including starving out for weapons and munitions. And Soviet manufacturers come up with the PPS-42 submachine gun because it's simple to make in Leningrad during the siege. They don't continue making it post the siege, though they make the PPS-43, which is a close version of it, afterwards, and that becomes more or less the standard early Cold War submachine gun. Is made in Poland, made in, I think, Romania and some of the other countries. Czechs do more inventive submachine guns, some cool ones, small ones, big ones, but cool submachine guns. So this would have all the troops that are fighting to cut off Lake Ladoga, or however you pronounce it up here, fighting to cut all that stuff, could have been freed up for other operations. It would have opened up this flank. It might have either allowed the Germans to come up here to cut off the railways, which cuts off basically all of the Lend-Lease except for what's coming in through Archangel, but cutting this off might allow them to take Murmansk. You take Murmansk, it's going to get even harder to come through here when the seaway is even open. More and more hard, could really change the war. And like I was saying down here, let me take a drink. If you have a fairly large force here, Germany very well may have initially, instead of just plunging deep in and then sort of almost accidentally creating pockets. Not quite accidentally, but it wasn't originally thought, oh, we're going to make big pockets, we're going to make big pockets. It was we're thrusting into the enemy and smashing through. And operationally, they created big pockets. But had you seen an opportunity down here, they very well may have, pushed up from here a bit more instead of pushing out here so much. Created a pocket, so it might have put even more Soviet forces in the pocket, counterbalancing the greater drive time / greater depth of pushing in. So, yeah, that could have done better for Germany. Let's see what case 64 says. Do you know you can make Reichskommissariats and general government? Yeah, I do know that there are some focuses for some of that, but we're still on Norway here. So this was always going to be integrated into the German Reich. And I'm refraining from the term, and definitely the term they used was Grossreich, which means greater Reich or very big Reich or whatever, not ugly Reich, as gross in English is. I think the same root, and I think it is a German. I think gross is an American English word that maybe the English now use it, but I think it comes in via the Germans in America versus coming via England, I think. But I think, so they put this one guy who's very much a velvet glove guy in Denmark. Now, what is sort of helping the velvet glove in Denmark is that there is functionally no resistance in Denmark. Denmark officially, because the anti-Comintern pact might not so officially go away, but practically sort of goes away with the Ribbentrop-Molotov pact in that, hey, we're now buddies with the commies, as opposed to being anti the commies. There is a second anti-Comintern pact that is signed by, I think all of the original members after the invasion of the Soviet Union starts. But it is also signed by some new members, including Denmark. Denmark officially goes to war with the Soviet Union. Denmark raises volunteer troops to go to war with the Soviet Union, and oops, you mean they're in the Waffen-SS? Originally, not. Now I think there are more Danes that end up going into and it's this, what is it, Nord? SS Division North. One of the regiments or something in there. More later join up. So there's probably more go in knowing that it's going to be Waffen-SS. But the initial group thinks they're going to be wearing Danish uniforms and going off and fighting in the great anti-Bolshevik crusade. And the Danish army initially just goes back into barracks after the few hours of fighting. Maybe somewhat disarmed, over time more so. But still sort of hangs around for a while. I think Hitler's plan was always to integrate Denmark into Großdeutschland. Not the division, the nation as he sees it. I think so. But even that I don't give as a foregone conclusion. Hitler, and I was talking about this last week, and I've given, if you really want to dig through, and I don't know if anybody ever wants to dig through my old lectures on the Third Reich event, or going through Third Reich events for the Hearts of Iron 3 playthroughs, but Hitler is a German sort of exclusiveness guy. He wants the Germans to be Germans and not intermixed with other groups. Himmler wants the Germans to be overseers over other groups. He is the pan-Aryanist in his faction. Hitler is not. I do not think Hitler wants to get Norway or Sweden into Großdeutschland. He sees them as Aryans, but he sees them as Scandinavians. So I'm not sure. He'd probably get this part of Jutland back or whatever, and I don't know what would have all ultimately worked out under Hitler's regime. And then, of course, you could look at post-Hitler, whatever that would have been. Had Germany won the war. I don't know. But I don't think he wanted to go further north. Now, Himmler did. So, German occupation was definitely subjugation, shall we say. Not necessarily integration, as in going to be annexed by Germany proper, but subjugation. What the British, and particularly Churchill, now realize Churchill does not become prime minister until after Operation Weserübung had already been started. He comes in, and I believe it after it's already over. He comes in, he's First Lord of the Admiralty, the civilian job in charge of the British Navy at the time, and he was pushed for an earlier during the Winter War as an attempt to help the Finns fight the Soviets, which were seen as an ally of the Germans, the Soviets as allies of the Germans, to want to push aid through, through this rail. There's a railway connection through here. You can see it right here. To push aid through from Narvik. And with the conclusion of the Winter War, that goes away. But there's still, because we can look at the Altmark incident, in which the Altmark is a support ship for German operations. It's a covert support ship for German operations out in the Atlantic, maybe even the Indian Ocean. It is heading back to Germany. The British know of its existence and looking for it. It gets into Norwegian waters. The British inform the Norwegians that it's there and it's carrying British prisoners of war. And so now Germany this isn't some civilian ship traveling through their territory. This is a covert naval vessel carrying prisoners of war. And would you please, and by the laws of the war, the laws of the war, if there is any laws of the war, but which is more of a modern thing than an old thing, is violating your territory, and if you allow it to happen, you're aiding the enemy. The Norwegians inspect the ship, find no prisoners on board, and say, "Have a nice day," and go on your way. The British are going, "What the hell?" and realize this is actually a lot of terrain, and so the British go and violate Norwegian territorial waters because they're within the 12-mile limit, and capture the ship. And find, like 300 prisoners on board. So that's how well the Norwegians searched the vessel. And there's well over 100 people at least. I don't know the exact number. So it isn't like there's 4 or 5 guys locked in some secret closet, some secret compartment somewhere that they can't find. Do they even look? Or do they just simply show up and ask the Germans and leave because they support Germany? Probably not. Because they're afraid of Germany? Very likely. And so Britain sees that Norway is going to be incapable of defending its territorial anything, waters, land, whatever. And this gets to, again, modern politics, Trump and Greenland. Norway cannot defend its territory. And we can see the very quickly, very, very rapid German occupation with barely any fighting of Norway. Norway does not mobilize its armed forces until it realizes it's being invaded, not before. During World War I don't know how quickly after the start of World War I, but virtually, sometime in 1914, late 1914, or very, very early 1915, the Netherlands mobilizes its armed forces, meaning all the reserves. They start drafting, as far as I know, drafting Dutch men into the army, make the army as big and as strong as they possibly can. And they keep it that way basically until the end of World War I. So all of World War I, and they erect border defenses, some definite strong points at key locations. Other locations, it's just a serious barbed wire fence. I mean, not just like a fence, like a fence complex, multiple layers. I've seen these recreations of it for a movie. I forget which one, about World War I. And it was sort of about spies and whatnot. But a serious barbed wire obstacle. And, other fence posts and stuff. Any serious divisional attack will just burst right through it. It's not really meant. And it's not enough soldiers sitting right on the border to stop that sort of thing. But they're patrolling it to stop spies, stop smuggling, only official. And there was trade going on between the Netherlands and Germany. There's also trade going on between the Netherlands and England and France. Especially if you look at the Dutch East Indies, trade out there was going on. So the Dutch, during World War I, really try to defend themselves from attack. They're hoping not to be attacked, but they're really trying to defend themselves from attack. Denmark and Norway in World War II weren't trying at all to defend themselves. That was not, I'm not going to say it's not a concern, but it was not something that they were going to do. Try to defend themselves. I don't know if it's a realistic, we could do everything we can and we still can't defend ourselves, so why bother? And that's a realistic viewpoint. A dumb one, because that means you won't have a nation because somebody will come and take it away from you. Something that I think the Europeans are starting to realize again. But I don't think, and I've talked to some Europeans, and two or three of, they think a lot of these people are still living in the old bubble, and they point to interviews of politicians in one in particular, and I haven't seen the interview yet. I'm going to try to see the interview. It's in English, fortunately, because it's an English politician, but who's at least out of office, might still be a member of parliament, but is no longer, holding governmental office because he was, the Tory. And his essence, no, he hasn't learned any, isn't realized the world has changed. And I know I talked to one of my good friends from Eastern Europe, won't want to go beyond that, and, saying, yeah, it's making the world worse, talking about the war with Iran and whatnot. And I didn't get, because we were sort of ending things then, didn't get more into it. No, Trump is not making the world worse. The rules-based international order ended the day, and I've come to the conclusion much after the event happened, and only within the last year. Not this year, but within the last year of time. Ended the day Russia occupies Crimea, and whether day you want to do this, and the Western world does nothing about it. Does nothing substantial about it. Because the Western, the EU, the US, Canada, Australia, South Korea, Japan, could have all immediately stopped all trade, buying and or selling stuff from Russia. Oh, but they needed their natural gas. They still need their natural gas. They'll freeze in winter in Berlin. Yes, but you're allowing aggression to happen. Had all of those nations I just mentioned, obviously there were going to be some, time Venezuela or whoever would still trade with Russia, but had all those nations at that time immediately frozen all Russian assets, not just a few of the oligarchs' assets in the West or something, froze all of Russian assets in the West, stopped all trade with Russia, and gone back to a Cold War type stance. I don't know if it would have gotten Putin coup, a coup against Putin. That could have been possible. Or if Putin would have gone, oh shit, this is too bad, I've got to back down. I don't know. It may have neither of those things happened, and the Ukraine war might have still happened. But it clearly showed the EU countries were not willing to have any discomfort. They actually, by completing the Nord Stream pipeline after the Crimea conquest, showed that they were going to continue to increase trade with Russia after Russia grabs. Not some so-called insurgents out here in the Donbass fighting. There were both insurgents as well as Russian forces without Russian uniforms on fighting here. But this is clearly thing. That is when, and I don't know that anybody but myself has stated this, so I think I'm prescient. That is when the rules-based order ends. I talked to various people here in talking about and liking the rules-based international order, and not that that's a bad thing. It's just a thing that ended when the people that were supposed to maintain the rules-based international order refused to do so, and that naked aggression was going to be tolerated because, oh sure, the U.S. froze, under the Biden administration, all arms deals with Russia, except for the ones that had already been accepted. So large amounts of Wolf ammunition and some other Russian-made, small arms that had already been approved for importation into the U.S. It was going to take maybe 6 months or longer to get in. All of that could be completed, but that was going to be stopped. Other trade with Russia is continuing. Europe is continuing to trade with Russia. Europe is showing no signs. And whoever blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and yes, the longer it goes without a clearly identified who, the more I think it was the U.S. But that wasn't Trump. I know everyone wants to blame Trump for everything bad, but that would have been the Biden administration. But pretty sure that was Biden. Correct me if I'm wrong if it happened under Trump. I may be wrong, but I think I'm right. That Europe is showing every sign that I could possibly see that they're going to continue trading with Russia. Even though Russia is now trying to conquer Ukraine. So this tells me the rules-based international order might or might not have been a fiction, but is definitely not anything operable now, and people complaining about whatever it is, whether it's Trump, Russia, China, whoever, is just being silly. As in breaking the rules-based international order. You can complain about, oh, hey, oil prices have gone up. Yep, they've gone up, but not because Trump is doing something illegal. No, it's just fighting has broken out between, and I'm using my language very carefully here, because the war started when Iran declares war against the United States in 1979 and takes the hostages and holds them for 444 days and releases them literally the hour that Reagan is being inaugurated in as president, because they are doing two things. One, they know Reagan's coming in, and they're shaming the Carter presidency by not releasing them during Carter's presidency, and they're afraid what Reagan will do in time if they keep the hostages. It's a both thing. It's not just a one thing. It's a both thing. They're both not afraid of Carter and wanting to shame him, and are afraid of Reagan and what he will do if they keep holding the hostages. Because, yeah. So, and they've been chanting, government officials have been chanting death to America. Not just some protesters. I'm sure you can go find somebody, some group of people in America that go say death to Israel. But people that are working as members of the State Department or other federal government, people coming out as part of their role in their office are not coming out and saying death to Israel. So this isn't just a crowd of people chanting something. This is the government orchestrating crowds of people to chant it. So they are at war with America. They have been at war, and we can talk about the Beirut barracks bombing. We can talk about the U.S. coal incident and other attacks. And sure, Iran mostly uses proxies in its attacks on America, but has been attacking America and functionally at war with America since 1979. So Trump didn't start the war. Trump started the military actions. Absolutely. Not arguing that point. I'm arguing the war is ongoing. And Trump's no new wars, he's standing by that no new wars. Because Trump also, back during the hostage crisis, was talking about how terrible Iran was doing, and talking about, at least in a few of his recent presidential election bids, as talking about how something needs to be done about Iran. So he has always stated that something needs to be done about Iran. That isn't a new war. That's an ongoing war that he's dealing with. Just if you're, somebody, well, Trump said no new wars. Yeah, it's not a new war. It's an ongoing thing. That he just believes that he thinks they're doing the best thing they can, I'm sure. I support, generally speaking, his actions, because I'm old enough to remember those days back in 1979 as well. I remember that. That was very, very emotional. And I know, including one moderator here that will often say, why not use nukes on Russia? I don't know if he really means it. I have at least one Ukrainian friend that would happily see Moscow and I truly mean happily see Moscow and other cities disappear under mushroom clouds. But there were lots of Americans, I'm not saying the majority, but lots of Americans, and not just 3 or 4%. I mean a good 30+%. Very much, especially if those hostages were killed, would have supported nuclear strikes on Iran. That was very much not off the table from American popular opinion back then. I'm serious about that. They would have supported nuclear strikes on Iran. They saw no great reason to, send in the, 82nd Airborne or something. Nope, just push the buttons and have, that they declared war, and war means nuclear weapons. And this was equal to a war. Again, I know we're very much, you get me off track here, but very much the United States has not been at war since 1945. If the United States were to ever to go to war again, be very, very afraid, because and it's not so much what the soldiers are doing in the field, it's what the American population. Once the American population is angry enough that you'll get 60+ senators to actually declare a war, America is going to be very outraged, people. And I will say it was very near. There was a de facto war declared. They didn't know how, I think to a point they didn't know how to declare a war against a non-governmental organization like Al-Qaeda. Because Al-Qaeda, we just changed their name. We're not at war with you. We're now Qaeda-I, or whatever, Just, give a new flag, new banner, and is it some new organization? Do we have to declare war all over again? Have that new organization with the same people in it declared war? Done something against us yet? No. So they did sort of kind of declare war after 9/11. That definitely allowed, particularly during the Bush administration, to strike just about anywhere in the world, and it was only sort of sympathies for governments like Britain and France that there wasn't, a Hellfire missile fired from a U.S. Airplane or something, or a helicopter or whatever, striking somewhere in their territories. They were nations that would sort of kind of cooperate. They would allow those nations to help with securing, killing whatever the terrorist operating in their nation. But it was, and I know a lot of you, not all of you, a few of you are older, but a lot of you might not remember those early days, in the first 2 or 3 years after 9/11. Yeah, if the French government was going to be uncooperative, the U.S. would have done strikes in Paris and dared the French to actively shoot at American operators. Americans would have just deployed Delta Force or somebody like that into France and go, what are you going to do, shoot at us? Are you going to join the terrorists? So, yeah. Let me get back on track. So, Britain and France, because there was also the Alpini division or whatever of the French forces set up as part, and were already prepared to go to Norway when Operation Weserübung launches. That's why they were able to respond as quickly as they did, both the British and the French. I do not think the plans, and I don't know right offhand not whether they were published or not, but I don't think it was to occupy all of Norway. I don't know how much it would have done to not the Trondheim thing, but definitely something up in Narvik, because they were worried or watching de facto Norwegians allowing the Germans to operate within their territory and doing nothing about it. Not even securing the ship Altmark, which was basically unarmed. Few people died in the assault on the Altmark, but that was literally just small arms. And the British going in fairly softly because they did not want to hurt any of the known prisoners on board. So because of the Altmark incident, they saw this war, and the French thought it was going to be another long war for them. Obviously, it ends very quickly. But they see this as going to be another long war, and they see Norway giving in to the Germans on, at least from their viewpoint, on almost all points. And it might seem outrageous to you, but I don't know from the British perspective that the Germans might have just demanded access to a few air bases and to a few ports. And the Norwegians might have gone, shrugged their shoulder, okay. And instead of an attempt at, a proper invasion, I don't know if they would have fought then. I think the overall response, and I did watch the Narvik movie that my Norwegian friends were, and then how bad the British betrayed them, but I'm watching the whole same thing going, the British didn't betray you at all. You betrayed them by not fighting very hard, and even in some cases, according to the movie, that you gave up some British operatives to the Germans. Yes, to save Norwegians, yes, but you betrayed the British. So the British were right in getting out of there because you weren't going to fight for yourselves. Yeah, I know that many, many, many Norwegians come and join the Free Norwegian Forces. I know eventually. But many more Norwegians don't. So the British occupation would have been very different than the German occupation. Hitler I don't think wanted to integrate Norway into the Großdeutsches Reich. Now, they wanted to definitely integrate Norway and Scandinavia, generally speaking, including Sweden, into the new system, new international system. You know, when they talk about there's a new world order, I know a lot of people go, oh, that means there's a new centralized plan of world governance. Some people have that plan. But new world order can just mean that the old order, could be the old international, rules-based order / UN armies that control the world is gone, and we're going to the new world order is the old world order of force. If you have enough force to protect your nation, you're fine. Unless somebody is very, very serious about going to war with you. See Franco-Prussian War, see World War I. Yes, you very well may, go to war. But that's major wars. Other minor wars, if you stay strong, see the Netherlands during World War I. Stay strong, they leave, or Switzerland, World War I and World War II. See that they leave you alone mostly. So there is would have been a very, very different nature to a British invasion of Norway than there was with a German invasion of Norway. Both are violating Norway's sovereignty, but can you be a sovereign country if you do not defend yourself? And my answer would be no. And I know Europeans that well before Trump ever starts running for office have described the European nations in their particular country, and I don't want to out them because those were in more private conversations, that they are just American puppets, and they hated it. Now, they agreed, generally speaking, that being an American puppet is better than being a Russian puppet, but they were still American puppets. I think the old puppets of Bush, Clinton, Obama, Biden, so it isn't just Democrats, but it is the Bushes. The old puppets that were in place in Europe are upset that the new American masters are doing things different than their old American masters. And this is why you get all of the hate coming out of Europe. I think, I don't know because what's going to happen, but I do believe the American plan, and I again talk to people that do study things, and in that they have master's degree or whatever in international relations. So not just, hey, I'm monitoring the situation by watching the news. I'm people who have dug into things internationally at times. Think Trump has no plans. I mean, just flat out, no, he's just winging everything. No, I don't think so. I think that there is a plan, because you can see what J.D. Vance has been doing very publicly at times. I think that they're trying to bring down the British government. They're trying to bring down the French government. They're trying to bring down the German government and replace them with other governments, particularly like Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, Reform or somebody in Britain. They feel that they have a reasonable ally currently in Meloni in Italy. They have a reasonable ally in Poland. I don't know if they personify it as a person in Poland. And a reasonable ally, Viktor Orban in Hungary. But they want to bring down some of the other leaders and replace them with different pro-American leaders, ones that actually, I think, would revitalize Europe, because I see the Trump administration, that includes J.D. Vance and others, that will continue on after Trump can no longer be president, whether they become president or not, but they will, run for office and attempt to be either president or vice president or senator or whoever. Once a revitalized Europe as a strong partner, as opposed to a declining Europe, a weak Europe, that the particularly Obama and Biden presidencies wanted to see have place. So I think there is a plan. Now, it may not be a meticulous, detailed plan as opposed to a general direction of travel plan, and then seeing how it goes as we go down the road plan, which is what I think is more the nature of it, than something like this, then that, then this other thing, and then this thing, and then this thing, and then everything detailed, planned out. So it may look chaotic, but I don't think it is too chaotic, but it is fluid, I would say, would be the idea to describe it. So, what would have happened had Germany not invaded Norway? I think the British would have invaded. I think the Norwegians would have put up token resistance to it. Even more token than what they did for the Germans. I think this would have really made, and I gladly either now or later have talks with my Norwegian friends, and it's more than just two people that I know in Norway. Quite honestly, though, not all of them hang out here often. Few of them do. I think it was actually good for the Norwegians that Germany invades them. Yes, best option would have been nobody invades them. Totally agree with that. But had the British invaded, had the Norwegians resisted at all, fired off any guns anywhere, wounded, killed any British, French soldiers anywhere, because then the Germans would have moved in to protect Norway. And now, what is Norway? Is Norway a collaboration government with the Germans? Does King Haakon II, or whatever the king was at the time, now a German ally fighting the Western allies? And because the British, had they got in there early enough, fast enough, strong enough, might have been able to hold out in Narvik. The British just might have been able to, and I don't know if the Germans were going to be prepared to try to move through Sweden like when the next summer comes around or something like that. And I will get to the chat. I know you guys are posting probably interesting comments, but whether smart or not, we'll find out in a moment if I think so. But I think with some, actually moved in and got secured with some basing and not have to try to fight off Dietl and the Germans that were already up here, but had it not been planned, had their, not seriously planned, and they're just rushing forces in the south and trying to move up and whatever. And if the British were already sitting here with even a minor fleet, that small invasion force would not have happened, and the paratroop units just would have been way too isolated. So I think the British could have held up here. I think we could have seen, and the Finn, and this border here is basically, at least my understanding, I know they don't have one of these, impenetrable. I think, again, I've not been up here, but I think we're looking at almost that kind of territory, at least for some of this. But I may be wrong. I've not been up there. Don't know. Hello, cool name, IG. I'll get back to you. So you might have been able, and so the Finns not wanting to maybe just have a continuation war, But that might have also been a good reason for Finland to stay neutral. And for the British, hear this, the British maybe negotiating the old Finnish borders back if Finland were to join in an anti-German, at some stage. Not, once the Soviets block Barbarossa's push to Leningrad, and it looks like they're going to hold on for a time, and especially once the Americans enter, if they were to enter in, December 7th, 1941 into the war. So the beginning of 42, Finland and Mannerheim, particularly of Finland, might, with a British negotiated return to old borders, which would actually mean Finland still has its pre-Winter War borders, more territory than it has now. Might have been able to negotiate Finland coming in on the Allied side, not so much on the Soviet side. And so not like they're going to put Finnish divisions trying to march to Berlin, but allowing, no Soviet occupation into Finland, of ground troops at least, whether they would allow, some ships or submarines or whatever that are already in the Baltic to operate out here, or like motor torpedo boats to operate out of Finnish control, not this little peninsula thing that the Soviets did briefly occupy, but, out of Finnish controlled territory, or whether there would be British or Soviet or whatever air-based units here, you would just see airstrikes, down. There were oil fields that the Germans did not really exploit very well. We can go into another whole story about that up in Estonia, but they could have, or something, and but would have opened up another sort of minor front on the Germans. So Norway, post-war, also Norway being a much more active battlefront, meaning a front lines somewhere. Now, this may be a very, very underpopulated area of Norway, but still could have been more damaging to Norway than what was. So German invasion, of the two, likely, because we're not talking about alternate universes here. We're talking about a British plan with French buy-in to occupy certain parts of Norway. Not necessarily to occupy Oslo, but I don't right offhand know. I know there's probably somebody has some maps whether what would have happened, and of course success often pushes for greater pushes. I don't know if they could have, just sort of, and they also wanted to get Narvik because the Swedish iron and steel manufacturing up here in winter could only ship out its resources during winter through Narvik. During summer, they could ship them out this way, which would interrupt Swedish supplies, particularly of that. So that was also part of it was the Germans just using it. Part of it was the Germans just using it economically, even if it's quote unquote neutral shipping or civilian German shipping, moving through Norwegian waters and only breaking out of Norwegian waters to, somewhere in the Skagerrak or whatever, if this was all neutral. So, no, you can't sink a German flag vessel, civilian, truly a civilian vessel in Norwegian waters because we're neutral. You can shoot them once they leave our waters, but not in our waters, kind of bullshit. How many nations really are going to allow them to be killed just because of some nicety of international relations, and that the Norwegians could not have stopped British submarines. I mean, they could have attempted to, but they could not have effectively stopped British submarines from torpedoing ships inside Norwegian waters because they just did not have the anti-submarine capacity being able to spread over such great territory. So, hey, there's war crimes and there's war crimes. And we can look at Japanese war crimes in World War II. We can look at Chinese, Chinese war crimes during their civil wars. We can look at, of course, Nazi war crimes. Those are at one level. And then we can look at, oh, hey, did some American paratroopers at some time after accepting the surrender of some German soldiers, like at a platoon or company level, execute them? Maybe. Maybe they did. You don't have to take prisoners. But once you take prisoners, you're supposed to, treat them via the Geneva Convention. So if a bunch of people jump up and raise their hands and go, I surrender, you can just machine gun them. Because maybe you're alone. You're Audie Murphy. Not that he ever did that to anybody. Don't want to put his name. But Audie Murphy alone did go, and take out machine gun nests. He was not capable of taking a prisoner at that moment because he was alone and there were many many people out there. Now, Sergeant York does take a huge number of prisoners in World War I. That is remarkable. Probably many more than he could possibly have shot himself. But, so you don't necessarily, if somebody goes, I surrender or whatever, and you're assaulting a machine gun nest, there's no responsibility. There's no war crime by any war crimes laws that you have to accept anybody's surrender. The enemy running, throwing their weapon down and running away does not mean they surrender. That means they're just booking out of there to then go regroup somewhere else and get another weapon. So you can shoot them in the back as they run. I know there was a report that an embedded press person got outraged by seeing American troops do that to some Iraqis. They were truly out there running away, and the Americans were just like shooting in the back and dropping them. They weren't like stopping and putting their hands up. They were like booking out of there. And yeah, they're throwing down their weapons to run better, but that doesn't mean that 5 days, 10 days, and since the insurgency happened, 2 months later, they wouldn't have picked up the guns and shot at the Americans. They weren't trying to surrender. They were trying to run. Run does not mean give up. Run means reposition to a new location. Maybe not, but maybe continue the war. So there's war crimes and then there's war crimes, if you know what I mean. The U.S. will prosecute their own soldiers, like the My Lai incident during Vietnam, like the Abu Ghraib incident during the Iraqi occupation, and put their own soldiers, including officers, into prison over war crimes. When they are clear enough, and that's one key, they're clear enough, and the system is informed of the crime. Meaning, if no one talked about the My Lai incident or something, it might have just disappeared, but then the system wouldn't have known, and it wouldn't have been publicly known that there was a war crime. So was there other war crimes committed by American troops during the Vietnam War? I don't know. Possibly. I'm not going to say yes, because I don't know. Obviously, there was none that were made so vocal. So, yeah, not all aggressions are equal. Not all occupations are equal. Like I say, of the two invasions, it is best, and that was sort of the choice for Norway. So the Norway either could try to resist all invasions, which it didn't, and I'm going to say this, didn't plan to resist any seriously. Oh yeah, once they realized that they were being invaded, they tried to send out their mobilization plan was to put letters in the mail to say, show up at your designated spot, which is here, and mail out the mobilization plans. Now, they could have mailed out the mobilization plans 5-10 days after the war with Poland started, and the Western Allies came to it, realized that they could have mobilized then, and then, okay, we're mobilized, okay, good. Well, now let's plan the defenses. Soldiers, put your rifles down and start digging, trenches for defense, defense fighting positions, or bomb shelter trenches or whatever. Where are we going to site more machine guns, to protect the runways, because that's maybe where the Germans would attack. Or let's set up, because if you look at, I'm not going to say in 1945, let's go up to Honolulu, but definitely like in 1942, 1943, the beaches at Honolulu, the beautiful beaches at Honolulu, there are civilians and probably soldiers and sailors, having leave there, out in bathing suits out on the beach. But behind them, between the beach and the land, there's anti-invasion obstacles, including lots of barbed wire, meaning there were passages through the barbed wire that they could go out and surf and play in the ocean or sunbathe or whatever, out at the beach. But there were defenses to keep an invasion from happening by Japan. Not the Germans or the Italians. They weren't worried about them in Honolulu. Similar things were going along, like at Brighton down here at the south coast of England. I don't know that there were any anti-invasion stuff along, the Liverpool coastline or something. But the British, at some stage, especially after the fall of France, you could still go out and use the beach on nice days, or unnice days if you wanted to. Not during the night. There were definitely curfew type hours and whatnot. But they were planning to do anti-invasion stuff. To the best of my knowledge, nothing like that was done in Norway. They did not plan to really resist an invasion. Now, maybe their minds just were like we talk about, people aren't, responsible people in government are still living in the old bubble. They don't realize that bubble has popped and there is a new world order out there of force. Maybe the Norwegians the leadership couldn't get their minds around it. Quisling could. Quisling is Quisling, and he is a Quisling. But he realized the world was a dangerous place. Things were fucked. And he also realized it wasn't the Germans, or just the Germans, maybe would be the better term, that was causing the world to be fucked. You had the Soviet Union already out there, and they were fucking the world, and you had other communist uprisings and civil wars, and then eventually, the Japanese are moving into Manchukuo, and then later from Manchukuo moving into, starting, the Marco Polo Bridge incident and starting the greater war with China. He realizes this. He is an ultra-nationalist of Norway. Now, he sees the West as being weak and going to lose. So he sees the best opportunity is to join up with the Germans. Now, he's wrong about that, but that's what he sees. So I personally don't see Quisling as an opportunist who betrays his country for keyword there, for benefit. Okay? Now, he does betray his country. I'm not arguing that. But in a way, so does the government betray their country by not preparing for defenses in a timely, hey, there's a war broken out. Switzerland realizes there's a war broken out. They elect a general, because to this day, there is no Swiss general in the Swiss army unless there is one elected, and there will only be one, and he's elected, and he, in a military sense, becomes a dictator. Not in a civilian sense, but in a military sense, he becomes the dictator for military operations and military plans and anything that falls into that realm. He's now in charge of, which could be, hey, this factory, you were making shoes, now you're making army boots, Oh, you're making, women's clothes, now you're making uniforms, It's whatever's defense needs. He becomes in charge of it. And Henry Guston or whatever, some Frenchish name. He becomes the general of Switzerland until the emergency's over, basically until World War I's over, and then he goes back to being a colonel. That's their highest rank in their army, is colonel. So Switzerland wants to be an independent nation. They still want to be an independent nation to this day, so they take their defense seriously. All Swiss males must join the army to this day, unless you physically can't. You must go into the army. Basically, all of the European nations, correct me if I'm wrong, I'd love to know if there has been active conscription in the U.S. They tried another TDS thing that starting, I think, in 2027 or something or whatever, all American males will be automatically enlisted, or no, automatically enrolled in into conscription for the United States. And people go, "Oh my God, Trump is like the..." No, all males in America, I had to when I turned 18, all males since 1918 have to sign up for selective services, is what they call it, but it's conscription. Have to sign up. It is a felony if you do not. Now, I don't know that they ever prosecute anybody like during this peacetime when they're not actively conscripting people for not signing up for the draft. But it is a law that you must sign up for the draft. Now, why women don't have to, I don't understand, because I thought they were equal. Hey, women, and I know Tinky, who sometimes is here, not so much recently, did go into the German army as a volunteer, and was she was part of an artillery battery, so she did go into the army. So some women do volunteer to go in, but why do we not conscript women? And I remember one little woman, a Fox News commentator with little scrawny arms, pleasant-looking woman, not ugly, not super attractive either, but whatever. What, you want to draft me and fight me in the war? No, but you can draft her and she could fly a drone. Especially fly a drone sitting in the U.S. that's operating some other part of the world, or she can be in the commissary, the mess service, and feed the guys who are flying the drone. She doesn't have to be put on the front line carrying a rifle. Now, anybody drafted should, even the Navy or the Air Force, should just have basic training, know what to do if there's an attack, a drone attack or whatever. Have some basic training, not necessarily basic army training, just some basic training. And so, and even not maybe morbidly obese, but even fat people could do some sort of roles, including your whole time in the army is anti-fat camp, because you don't get to just be fat so you don't have to go. You get exercised constantly until you go. So I don't know why women are not in the draft as well, because in modern day warfare there may be many, many roles for them. And you could be in the back of a truck flying a drone near the front lines and be killed. We could buy another enemy drone. But you don't have to necessarily put on a heavy backpack and carry a rifle and go storm a bunker. There's all kinds of dangerous roles that your life could contribute to defending of your nation. So this, to me, continues the fucking lie of women's liberation and feminism and all this other bullshit. We are not equal. Doesn't mean there shouldn't be a certain level of that. Is this the full DLC? Hello, Cosmic Glims. No, this is not every paid DLC. Okay, now let me go back to the chat, because I've been ignoring you and giving my monologue here. Okay. Wouldn't the UK was planning on invading Norway, though I think Denmark could have stayed neutral, because it could have. If they didn't. Einstein, okay, we went through that. Okay. Let's see. Yes, I know we can do. Do you know? Can you even make Reichskommissariats? And definitely in some mods they have Reichskommissariats in the East, and they do have. Somewhere in here, I think. Similar. They do have some of the Roth. The commentary. Oh, okay, here we go. This is what I was looking for. This here, Uplift, the Rosenberg office, And you can see allows for the formation of subject states and administrative division in conquered territories such as the Reich commissariats and protectorates. Also allows division of Europe into projected spheres of influence. So yes, even in the base game now, they have this. Okay, and like I don't ignore the chat forever. I just go on my stuff, and then but instead the British got kicked out of France, Greece, Norway, Singapore, Crete. Yes, they did. Germany is just cooked. We don't have atomic reactors because, like, to buy electricity from France for 5 times the price. Well, yes. I think. Now, this to a degree is me talking out of my ass. And I forget which Thomas Clancy novel, but there was, I believe, one Thomas Clancy novel. I think, yeah, I actually listened to the audiobook many, many years ago. That there was a group of people that were going to try to spread a plague throughout humanity, and only a small group of people that were going to be given the antidote to it. And they were going to use, I think, like the Sydney Olympics or something like that in the book, not or whatever, to try to spread this thing out. And they were going to try to kill off, 99% of humanity, so that the planet will survive. And it's a very well researched and reasoned book. It isn't like some of the Kingsman book or movie or whatever that's just a bit silly or very silly. I think a serious core element to the green movement wants to seriously depopulate the planet. And so instead of, because we can look at agrarian societies, children are seen as a benefit, as the more you have, the better. Where in urbanized societies, the more children, not that you shouldn't have children, but the more children you have, the more expenses you have. Children do not provide benefits. They are purely a drain, both individually and via the whole society. And that is an economic factor. Because if you're working and you have to pay for your food, you've got to pay to feed more mouths. But if you're working in an agrarian society, more people means more food. And even children, after, get out of infancy and a toddler age, and, once you're more and more as time goes on, you can be more and more of an effective. So briefly, few years, yes, you can be a drain on the income, but children worked out in the field in agrarian societies, whether that be in Europe or in Africa or Asia. Children worked in the fields. This is why in a lot of Western countries, I don't know about your Western country, but in most of America, you have a long season of no school. That was to allow agrarian children to work when it was most needed for them to work. So we have summer vacation, as it was called when I was a child. I don't know what it's called today, presumably the same thing. But it was and because we were mostly an urbanized society by that time, it was definitely seen as a vacation, as opposed to summer work in the agrarian environment. So these people, and it is quite correct that if you have to work to get food, meaning to get money to buy food, if that is the case, then children are seen as a deficit. Now, in the near future, say 15 to 20 years from now, is seen by a few people, food may be able to be raised without cost. Because they see, correctly or incorrectly, but I'm saying what they see the, and I think actually the better term is droids as opposed to robots, but the coming of smart robots, or the coming of droids. And a droid very well may be a big combine harvester, or it may be something walking around roughly human size, making other droids, doing the mining, doing all of the work. Most of the work on a ship would be done by droids. Most of the needed work, so food grown on one continent can be provided to another continent without substantial human labor, including mining, building the droids, building everything, building the factories that build the droids, do all of that in 15 or 20 years, that this may be becoming a case in which scarcity, particularly of food, scarcity of housing, may become a thing of the past. Well, once you go through that, then we'll see how much children are thought of as a burden, and then we'll also see how much food, including the oceans, if properly managed, not just raped over with, like the Chinese are doing with overfishing. Used to, before the Mediterranean was overfished, you used to get lots of big tuna and other things out of the Mediterranean. And that is, I think, mostly gone, though I'm sure it can be brought back if it's allowed to be done right and then managed correctly. Much of the seas, and of course we can increase by certain measures, increase the productivity of the seas, including farming in the seas. I think humanity can grow a lot more food than it has. So I am not a Malthus. I'm not a person that sees that, if you know who Malthus was, who sees that there's a limited amount of food and humanity's going to overpopulate and then, become starving, so fight for, wars for food. I think Malthus is wrong. Another pseudo-Malthus is Karl Marx, and I think he's entirely wrong in his views of history, in his views of economy, and all of that, his whole historical viewpoint. And a lot of people, including conservatives, believe in Marxism of his views of history, that all wars are mostly fought over economics. Most wars are not fought over economics. I think he is entirely wrong. I think he had a viewpoint, and he looked at history to try to find facts that proved his point and ignored facts that disproved his point. I am a non-Marxist historian. So whether we need to depopulate Africa because they are overpopulating and cannot produce enough food, which is quite true. They are overpopulating because we can give them medicines that resist a lot of the most terrible diseases there. Not all of them, but a lot of the diseases. Economically, we can afford to give them the medicine. They cannot produce enough food for themselves in their method, so they are becoming overpopulated. That is correct under current status. Would they change their social ways and not overpopulate themselves and not do what Europe and South Korea particularly are doing, is depopulating themselves, meaning not have a birth rate that matches the death rate, have a balanced population, and not being forced to have a balanced population by government laws or whatever, but simply by nature. Meaning, well, I don't need to have 10 kids. If someone wants to have 10 kids, fine, but I don't need to have 10 kids. I can have 3 kids, and that'll be fine, kind of thing. And just do so naturally, organically, and not make it a huge burden, or not make it societally set up that women are encouraged whether intentionally or unintentionally, encouraged not to be married and not to have children. Oh, what about their careers? Women and their careers. Other bullshit. Not that women shouldn't be able to have careers. We've gone from the idea that women, if they choose to, should be able to, which I actually agree with, to women should have careers, and it's only those that are either somehow self-compelled, meaning they just so gotta have kids instead of cats. I mean, aren't cats good enough? Or are some other reason, because they're not smart enough to have careers, have to find a man protector, and that burden that they'll have to have that man protector is to bear children. The pendulum has swung so far, and we've allowed the pendulum to swing so far so fast that it's causing depopulation. There will always eventually be a correction. This is one thing the Marxist, the leftist, the whatever, believes in the blank slate theory, and believes that they can just educate them to a viewpoint. I disagree. I think at some time reality will come and smack them in the face, and things will change, because I believe in nature, not nurture. I think reality will show that it's nature, not nurture. Not nice to fool Mother Nature, as an old commercial used to go, and I think that'll go. So I think the reason the Greens actually destroyed the nuclear power plants as opposed to just decommissioning them is they want to depopulate Germany. They want to have Germany freeze in the winter. Not that they got to buy it from France for 5 times the cost. That's just sort of the thing that, yeah, they'll got to buy it from France, and then they won't have children, so there'll be less Germans and less people and less people. I think that is the goal of the Green movement, is anti-human. Not just communist left, not just watermelon. That was an old term that, because, again, the generally winning of the Green movement, but green on the outside and red on the inside, which is sort of, yeah, you're talking, you don't want to pollute the rivers, you don't want to, put too much smog up in the sky? Oh, that's a good idea. When in really what they're trying to do is shut down factories, over-regulate things for communism. Whether it's for communism, that's sort of become, but a neo-Marxist world order, maybe better terms, maybe look more at China or something like that, that there will be, it won't be quite the leveling of communism, but it'll be a modern day neo-fascistic, not fascism, but fascistic governance system of ever declining, ever limiting, ever whatever population on the world that will use less and less energy and become more and more at one with nature, until there is, not that everybody is out living in the Stone Ages, but living a sort of idealized, you have your iPhone or whatever the modern equivalent would be at that point world, but living in a pseudo wood cabin with a composting toilet and very little or no running water, that you somehow go get the water from the spring, and some sort of idealized, only like 5% of the current world population left, and of course very, very few white people, because they're the ones that really cause all the problems. And this modern techno green solar wind power minimalist thing, I think that's their ideal people. I think I've described their ideal. And paying high prices is just forcing people to have less children, costs more pain, more better. Okay, isn't a war crime to drop a nuclear bomb because it'll kill thousands? No, it's not a war crime to drop a nuclear bomb. What's crime with that? Look, you've got to understand. If there is a person who works in a factory who makes a weapon, killing that person is a perfectly legitimate military target. See, this is what the modern left has made everybody think. Baumstahl, steel, what is that? Something steel, I don't know. That is not a war crime, okay? So a factory worker is a warrior for the nation. The person who grows the food for the soldier is a legitimate target. So farmers are legitimate targets. The person who grows the food for the factory worker is a legitimate target. The mother who is raising a child who will become a warrior is a legitimate target. All of the population are legitimate targets. So long as they continue to resist your attacks, they are all legitimate targets. It is not a crime to attack people supporting, and I don't mean just like, oh, I wear a t-shirt that says I support Palestine or something. I'm talking about people actively supporting a war effort. It is a legitimate attack on them. So, if you have a captive population that is being forced, we could talk about it. But if people are going to work in a factory making a drone that will go and attack you, it is legitimate to attack that factory, and it is legitimate to attack the workers that attack the factory. So if you have Leipzig, which is producing weapons, and you want to nuke it, nuke it. There is nothing wrong with it. If you want to firebomb it, firebomb it. Destroy the city and everyone living in it because they're producing weapons. That is not a war crime. There were no Americans, Hap Arnold, Arthur Harris, were not charged with war crimes for their dehousing campaigns. They wanted to dehouse the people. Well, the people were in the house while they were dehousing them. Kill them. There is nothing wrong to do with that, or nothing criminal. You can talk morally, but criminally there is nothing wrong with it. So nuclear weapons are not a war crime. Period. They are not. So, yes. Hello, folk. Didn't see you earlier. Allied invasion force was en route to Norway before the German invasion. Yes. I just don't right offhand remember all the details, but I know that they were planning that. This playthrough, again, I don't know if Cosmic Gleams is still around, but yeah, and I sort of answered this. This playthrough was just sort of spur at the moment, started with whatever I had, everything up to date on the free DLCs and a bunch of DLCs, but not the most latest ones because I hadn't bought them and I didn't know if I was going to continue playing this much after the start, which I think I will. So I probably next playthrough buy some more DLCs. Okay, and Thomas says, I believe a lot why young people are part of the modern left organizations in social pressure and attempt to put it aside. Yeah, there's a lot of the various pressures that are going on. The left has been very, very good at going after all aspects of society and not allowing any of them to exist. Okay, let me see. I know I was going to play, and you got me talking about history. It's all your fault. I'm blaming you all of you, not just any one of you, all of you over it, as well as needing to do the national focuses of to be able to launch these wars because I didn't want to do the justification. But I think it'll be next time because we have this. We can declare war on Belgium and the Netherlands. So we will do the invasion of France next time. I don't just want to start it now, and it's already 2 o'clock, so I've been going 3 hours. Not terribly long, but not overly short either. So I want to thank everyone. Cool name IG, okay. Cosmic Gleams, Thomas, Folk, of course, Baumstahl. Thomas, if I didn't already say, K64, Arno, if you're still around, thank you, Jamnuska. Remember, I am both on live streaming on both Twitch and YouTube, so if you prefer one or the other, I'm happy to have you on both. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, whatever. I shall be back tomorrow with playing War Thunder, hopefully with Arno, and anybody else who wants to join if we get enough. We used to do a lot more custom matches. We had, 8, 12 people playing. Now it's just sort of like 4 or 5, so just maybe a team match. But whatever, if you want to join us to either hang out or actually play, that would be great. And then, of course, I'll be back next week. I don't think I'm streaming for Slithering this weekend or this coming week, but I think the week after it, I think I have like 2 days in the week. So sometimes they push me up and more streams, sometimes less. They're just balancing out with all the streamers they have there. It's not anything. The guy who does it really does try to balance it out, so everybody's getting their shots at things. Just how it works out, what weeks we get on. So thank you all. I really do enjoy talking about history, as you know, probably more than I should, but I do. So thank you all. See you next time. Have a good day.